Ibn Arabi certainly knows his Kalam and knows his Ibn Sina, but he's not really primarily interested in that way of explaining Tawheed to a sophisticated generation. Of course, the masses, the guy selling falafel on the street corner doesn't need any of this. He's just a simple believer. But people with ideas, with inquiring minds, they need to have these things spelt out for them, which is why we need logic and we need metaphysics. So Ibn Arabi is coming from a completely different world. Muslim Spain, where you have a few philosophers, but basically it's the Zahiris and the Malikis, and Ibn Arabi is a Zahiri. So he's here with his Zahiri fiqh, teaching the ruler in Konya. But his ideas, as everybody knows, are really hard to understand and really easy to misunderstand. That's why it's said of Ibn Arabi that nobody in Islamic civilization has been more respected by people who have read his books, and nobody has been more hated by people who have not read his books. Which is why most of the scholars today will say, you don't need to involve yourself with these controversies because, you just need to learn how to do your wudu correctly and how to, sort out your own situation. Don't get involved in the extraordinarily sophisticated questions, the subtlety, the lata'if of that type of discourse. People come into Islam that way. Konya still has a long reach. We have an Ibn Arabi society in England, and Konya's works are slowly being interpreted and translated. It brings people into Islam, but for most of us it's not useful stuff to read. And generally you will find the sheikhs saying, give him the benefit of the doubt, but you don't need to get into that stuff. This is important particularly for new Muslims, because very often with that kind of Western determination to climb Mount Everest, not because the view is better, I guess, maybe it isn't, but because it's there. The Western desire to climb the highest mountains and to go down to see the vents at the bottom of the sea, to go to the moon. As soon as we become Muslim, we say, who is the most difficult metaphysician in our history? And so as soon as we've mastered wudu, we want to open the Futuhat and Makkiyah and become, that's really not permissible. And most of that is from ego. And it's very dangerous. And those books are not going to open themselves up to people who begin either with hatred and envy, or who begin with self-love and a sense that, he's the Shaykh al-Akbar, so let me see if I can sort of master his system. This is all nafs, and converts in particular in the Western tradition over the last 100 years have often fallen into that trap. In any case, these are the people who are here, and Sadr ad-Din Qunawi seems to have been kind of adopted into Ibn Arabi's entourage of household here as a boy, and is very close to him, and is the person who really becomes what we would nowadays call his literary executor. If a novelist or a historian nowadays dies, in his will usually he would say, and I appoint as my literary executor Professor Blenkinsop of Aberdeen University, who then becomes the custodian of the books and makes sure that the editions are correct. And Sadr ad-Din Qunawi has that very significant and huge responsibility. So these key works, his tafsir in particular, his Kitab al-Fukuq, his commentary on the Fusus al-Hikam, become the way in which the Ummah subsequently almost always read the books of Ibn Arabi. And it's important, if we want to at least take a peep into that tradition, that we do so with a teacher who is following Qunawi's tradition, because Qunawi then goes on to become the teacher of a whole lineage that goes on through Dawud al-Qaysari, who becomes the first Ottoman alim and mudarris and qadi, and then Mullah Finari, who's the first Ottoman Shaykh al-Islam. All of these people are writing commentaries on the Fusus al-Hikam. The Ottoman tradition is absolutely focused on scholars who are Fusus al-Hikam commentators, and that all comes from the tradition of Qunawi. Qunawi is interesting when you consider our traditional stereotypes. All of the tourist guides here will tell you, Mevlana Jalaluddin, he was a Sufi. And normally we'd interpret somebody like Qunawi as a kind of philosopher, really. And when he's taught in the Iranian houses or madrasa, it tends to be in the context of a certain peripatetic Aristotelian take on Islam. But in fact, if you look at Aflaki again, who I think preserves quite well the memory of how the people of Konya remembered these men, there are some strange incidents in which generally Rumi is not taken to be a Sufi. So there's one incident where the Pervane, who's the vizier of the Seljuk Sultan, who's in Mongol vassalage, but the Pervane is somebody who's close to these scholars. He studied hadith with Urmawi, he's very close to Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, and a lot of these encounters between these great minds happen in the court or the diwan or the majlis of this Mu'aynuddin Pervane, who's a very sophisticated, cultivated person who loves ideas. That one of Pervane's assistants dies, and everybody is at a kind of aza or constellation awake. And it's time for the Maghrib prayer, and all the people say, it has to be Mawlana Jalaluddin. And Rumi declines, and it's very interesting to see what he says. According to Aflaki, he says, Ma mardomi abdalim beharja'i ke bashad minashinim vemikhizim. We are the Abdal. Wherever we are, we sit or we rise. One of his characteristic enigmatic statements, but he's saying he doesn't want to lead the prayer. So he indicates instead that Sadruddin Qunawi should lead the ulama in prayer at this event. And he says, Imamatira erbabi tasawwuf wa tamakkun la yaghand. He is one of the people of tasawwuf and tamakkun. And the dignity of leading the prayer at such an event should be with such a person. And quite often, in fact, we find this bifurcation in the memory of the people of Konya at the time, that Rumi is not a Sufi. He's one of the Abdal. If you're going to understand him and understand his poetry and the impact that he has on the later Islamic world, and indeed on people who are reading him now, including thousands of New Age followers in the West, you have to understand what it means for Rumi not to be a Sufi. What these people are saying is that a Sufi is somebody who is engaged in complex, systematic metaphysics. That's what the ulama of Konya would understand tasawwuf to be. So Qunawi, absolutely that. He takes the often virtually incomprehensible, enormous weight of Ibn Arabi's teachings, and he kind of makes it comprehensible, makes it into a system. And probably but for Qunawi and the work that he did here, not many people in the later Ummah would have heard of Ibn Arabi, because it's really hard to understand, and you turn a page and you get the exact opposite of the thing that he said on the page before, and sometimes that's deliberate. It's very hard, heavy going. Qunawi turns it into a system, particularly the tradition of the Fusus, which, as I've said, becomes axiomatic, and it's like the intellectual spine of the Ottoman ulama system, and also in the Mughal Empire and further east. Qunawi is the one who's doing that. So he's a Sufi, but Rumi is in this world, and Rumi describes himself as Abdal, ma mardume Abdalim. What in 13th, 14th century would the Abdal have been? Well, it's obviously derived ultimately from those hadiths, which are sound hadiths, which indicate that there will be a class of awliya who are Abdal, that is, the substitutionary saints, often regarded as being 40. It is always a constant number. If one of them dies, another is, as it were, appointed to the vacancy, and most of them are hidden, and it's through their dua that creation is sustained. And this is a standard feature of traditional Sufi hagiology. But that doesn't seem to be what Mevlana is implying here. The Abdal in that world of Seljuk Anatolia seems to have meant something a bit different. There were a lot of people wandering around, usually mendicants, calling themselves Abdal. And even Europeans who travel in this region at the time, mostly Italians, remark on the strange individuals with odd behavior revered by the masses and the peasantry in particular, being known as the Abdal. What it seems to mean is somebody whose access to the divine is not mediated by years of very elaborate study of metaphysics, and whose articulation of his system is ecstatic and impressionistic rather than rigorous. Certainly, if you look at Qurnawi's work and Rumi's work and you put them side by side, it's like they're from different universes. Qurnawi is extremely precise, difficult, demanding. In his tafsir in particular, everything is rigorously worked out from first principles, and he arm wrestles you into the conclusion. Rumi does none of that. He's not really interested in these aqliyat, these intellectual sciences. He's interested in the path of love, rahi ashq. He is not linear, he is, as it were, circular, and the circle is the symbol of love. In our civilization, it's the moving beyond, the stripping away of any earthly thing like intellectuality even. Once you're in the Hajj or the Mi'raj, there's circles, there's spheres, aflaq. It represents the path of love, of ecstasy, and the turning that the dervishes do, usually for the tourists, is a kind of reflection of that, even though in the Mevlevi tradition, particularly at the beginning, it was a very impromptu thing rather than the ceremonial thing that it became later on. So if we're going to understand Rumi in that world, and obviously the ulama really revere and love him because they're all saying, you're the one who should lead the prayer at this official function. He's declining because he doesn't really feel that he is from that world. He is not from the world of institutional religion, either of highfalutin Sufi metaphysics, that seeks to get, in Ibn Arabi's tradition, into the very heart of the Qur'an rather than the surface of the Qur'an. Neither is he from the world of Sirajuddin Urmawi, where everything is worked out by logical principles that are ultimately Aristotelian and are there originally to refute Mu'tazila and others. Instead, he's from a different kind of universe, which is this universe of love. And when we talk about some of the other people that he encountered, we'll see how significant that is. But still, Sadruddin Qurnawi, just because he's engaged in these extremely intricate reflections on Allah's book and writing these meticulously crafted commentaries on Ibn Arabi's most difficult cruxes of metaphysics, shouldn't allow us to be distracted from the fact that all of these people were exoteric scholars. And in fact, Sadruddin, we call him Sadruddin Qurnawi, but it seems that the most common title for him at the time was Malik al-Muhaddithin. So if you look at Aflaki, who's mainly interested in Rumi's tradition, the Arifin, basically the Mevlevi tradition, you'll see that what he's really doing, his daytime job, as it were, is his hadith classes. He is the greatest hadith scholar of Qunya of the day, and that is how he's generally known.